If you're anyone like me, then I'm sure that you can remember the hype that surrounded Battlefield 1 last year. And sure, some or maybe even a lot of it were just shots against the newest Call of Duty game, but it's impossible to deny that there were a ton of people excited for the new Battlefield. There was an interesting dichotomy going on between these two games at that time, with a lot of people on Battlefield's side. Not just because it was as pretty as Ryan Gosling's perfectly symmetrical face, but because it was delivering what many of the Call of Duty fanbase was desperately scavenging for. Now, I'm sure all of you know about this by now, so I'm not going to explain any further, but I wanted to preface this to illustrate where we are today. Battlefield 1 is an interesting game to discuss because its quality doesn't necessarily correlate with its remaining popularity and support, in my opinion. When looking at things like performance and sales, one could say that the game did live up to the hype that it was building. Unlike most games, Battlefield didn't get beaten out by a different game or died out just because it wasn't a good game. As a matter of fact, Battlefield 1 did a much better job at this than previous Battlefield games, with a stable launch and relatively crippled only competitor. But yet over 6 months later, Battlefield 1 is failing at being as successful as its previous installments. And while there are quite a few factors to this, there's one in particular that stands out to me. In the end, Battlefield is getting beaten out by itself, its own other games even, and here's why. Now before I state anything else, I personally think that Battlefield 1 is a great game in both its multiplayer and even its single player for what it's worth. But I don't think I've played the game in months, or have felt any real inclination to do so anytime recently. When breaking all of this down, there are two big factors. The first are forces that cause the player to stop playing the game, and the second is the thing that stops the player from wanting to come back after some time has passed. Battlefield 1 took a dangerous leap in going backwards in time when it seemed like everyone else was going forwards, and while this was excellent for promotional purposes, it did come at a cost. There's a trade-off present when dealing with the decision of making a game in the past or in the future, and I plan on making that an entire video on its own, so I'm only going to briefly touch on it here. So while everyone was hungry for a change of scenery from the boost jumping that seemed like it was becoming the norm, the developers at DICE had to deal with some adversity, and these issues are clearly shown in the finalized product of Battlefield 1. When comparing all of the weapon and customization options in Battlefields 1 and 4, it really becomes a night and day difference. This trade-off, as I've previously mentioned, impacts the game for sure. It impacts the weapons and their customization options, the amount of gadgets, the vehicles and means of taking down said vehicles, and even the map's design and verticality. After going back to play both of these games to get the gameplay that you are seeing on your screen, I found that Battlefield 1 has much more satisfying infantry gunplay, but I could easily see where people could find a game like Battlefield 4 more fun simply because of its unpredictable, only in Battlefield moments. In Battlefield 1, you can't shoot a helicopter out of the sky as you jump from a skyscraper to get to the next objective. No longer can you headshot snipe a guy in obliteration while parachuting. But then again, who would ever even be able to pull that off? Not only are there more weapons and gadgets to choose from per class in Battlefield 4, but there is also more variety in them as well as individual customization. If you want to have an AK-12 with an angled foregrip, flashlight, suppressor, tiger camo, and a purple holographic sight sized at 67%, you totally could. In Battlefield 1, you can have like a bayonet or not, and a couple of different sights. I mean, in Battlefield 4, there were 3 different types of suppressors, for crying out loud. 2 of which looked like a big, fat cock. So it's no secret that Battlefield 1 could sure use some more weapons, as some people would argue. But even with that being said, I really don't think it would matter. At this time, many of the weapons seen in modern Battlefield 4 didn't exist, and straying off the historical boundaries even further than they already have would clearly anger some people to the authenticity of the game. And to a lot of people, sure, this may not matter. Like me. But why make a game centered around World War I if it's only somewhat historically accurate? And even if there are a ton of weapons and customization options, how different would they even be? With the already small amount currently in the game, a lot of them feel the same and offer little variety. Yeah, you could make the argument that this is true in practically every first-person shooter. You know, you pull down the trigger and it shoots. But a game like Battlefield 4 had much more variety with this aspect. Weapons looked recognizably different from one another. They also sounded different, had more variety on fire rates, bullet spread, and range. And sure, Battlefield 1 has this too, but it is much less noticeable. There was a time where my loadouts reset for whatever reason, and I was playing the game having no clue that I was back to using the starter medic weapon after using a better one for quite some time. And yeah, sure, this could be a me problem, but you go ahead and tell me the fundamental differences between the Cellblastbaster M1916, however you say it, and the Mondragon Trench. And the answer is you can't. The second one isn't even a real weapon in the game. Yeah, I just took two names of guns from the game, combined them, and you didn't even notice. Going back in time also means less individual customization on the weapons themselves. Each weapon in Battlefield 4 could be customized with not just different sights and a bayonet, but muzzles, grips, lasers, camos, and more. These factors really do add up and add longevity to the game. In Battlefield 4, there was always a weapon, attachment, gadget, or camera that you can be trying to unlock. In Battlefield 1, however, progression is not only much slower, as you literally don't get anything for after hitting rank 3 until freaking 10, but the variety within those unlocks is much more stagnant. And a lot of this contributes to this trade-off again when going back in time, opposed to going in the future or staying at modern times. And yeah, I'm sure that there are more weapons, customization options, and gadgets that existed at this time that could have been implemented into Battlefield 1. And trust me, I'm not saying that I'm upset that Battlefield 1 doesn't have bombastic jetpack double jumping action like Call of Duty, but a lot of these issues stem from the setting. And honestly, the amount of weapons and pretty lacking progression system and unlocking system is a small issue when looking at the bigger picture. These issues are the first part to what I'm talking about. This is what I believe got me to stop playing Battlefield 1, to get bored with it. And to me, even despite how much I played Battlefield 4, this was normal to me at the time. I'm someone who every day is finding myself playing these types of first-person shooters less and less, no matter how good it is. I'm finding single-player games to be more encapsulating and fun, and am not just someone who can sit and shoot plebs in the face for hours on end. But even with that being said, I think that there's a bigger reason behind Battlefield's situation. And if you followed a lot on Battlefield 1, you probably know where I'm going with this because I am yet to mention it. But the biggest reason, above anything else I've said before, as to why people aren't playing Battlefield 1 anymore, is because of inconsistent content. If you look at the graph here, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that Battlefield 4 has had more content come out for it than Battlefield 1. Both were the same price, and sure, both have the same amount of DLCs, but the spacing is completely different. At this time in Battlefield 4's life cycle, the game was on its third DLC pack, Naval Strike, which was freaking awesome, by the way. By the time Battlefield 1 had its first, getting people hyped for something is easy, especially nowadays, but keeping up that hype and remaining relevant is a completely different beast. Having your first DLC pack drop 6 months after your game comes out is just not a good idea when you're a subscription-based game like Battlefield is. Coming back to a game is hard enough. Relearning and getting back your bearings and skills can be frustrating enough for some people that they'll quit again after 5 minutes just for this reason. Illustrated perfectly by the gameplay you're seeing here. So many games have this mentality, where the game releases and then content for that game will continue to come out in the preceding months. But when you have people leaving your game because they don't feel like they're making progression anymore, is a DLC with a few more guns and maps really mean as much anymore? Sure, they may have been excited for it when they felt that they had chewed through that current content and wanted some more, but that time is now past. And now months down the line, new games have come out. When I heard about They Shall Not Pass, I wasn't really that excited. If I had heard about it back in December when I actually wanted new content, sure, I would have bought it. But nothing came, and now it's March, and I'm playing Horizon Zero Dawn, and I just didn't care enough to pay $15 for a new gun in the French army or something. Back when Battlefield 4 was out, I was excited for each and every content release. I looked forward to unlocking the new weapon, and then using them on the new maps in the game mode, getting kills, and unlocking attachments for them. And despite what I said about my lack of aspirations towards first-person shooters, I really think I would have felt the same towards Battlefield 1 simply because I love Battlefield. Out of all of the first-person shooters that I've played, Battlefield has always been my favorite. But with these issues, it made getting excited really hard for me, and I think it did for a lot of others too. Sure, I can show off graphs about player population and how it's stagnant with Battlefield 1 and compare that to Battlefield 4's, but that really isn't the point here. The issue I'm addressing is the why and the how, not the what. Battlefield 4 sure did have a rocky start, but it was able to consistently put out new content for its already content-filled game. Hell, you could even argue that Battlefield 4's poor release helped it stay relevant in the long run, as it was constantly being updated on both the content and bug scale, ultimately culminating into the game we see today with an almost stupid amount of customization and options in all regards. The game made improvements, there was no denying that, and people wanted to see for themselves. And honestly, what a better way to see improvements to a game you stopped playing than on a new map with some new weapons. And you can see this happening in other games too, not just Battlefield.
Oh, nice!
Oh! Get wrecked! Get wrecked, kid! That was so sexy. I just destroyed his life.
It really sucks because Battlefield 1 is far from being a bad game, and I still think that it can be redeemed. Some of you may think that there is no issue here, and that's fine. I'm sure you're loving the game, but I've seen enough videos about this and threads and all these things that I'm not the only one that feels this way. It still does have a healthy player base for sure, but it's clear to see a difference between the populations between Battlefield 1 and its predecessors. Sure, the time period does have some to do with it, but most of it is just a poor unlock system combined with sparse, uneven content. There's a reason why things like Netflix have their shows on a schedule to come out on a certain day at a certain time, or why The Bachelor is always on at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday nights.
I knew this kind of love existed. I just never thought it was gonna happen for me.
People like consistency. It allows them to plan ahead, to get excited, to mark something on their calendars and plan around it accordingly. It's the same for anything, whether it be TV, YouTube, or a game season pass. I mean, seriously, this dude uploads 3 videos in 4 days and then doesn't upload for almost 3 weeks? The fuck is wrong with him? There are a lot of different things that you can blame Battlefield 1's lacking sustainability on. And I'm sure there's people out there that can argue that there's no problem at all and people are just gonna play what they prefer. Its amount of content and customization, its time period and setting, Battlefield 4's success, or the fact that Battlefield Hardline is the best game ever created, can all be attributed to this issue. But in my opinion, Battlefield 1 is a game that's sole problem stems from its content, and no amount of grenade nerfs, map changes, less casual oriented play, or hell, even setting alteration is going to change that. Okay, the Megalodon is pretty cool, I'll give it that. So you've heard my thoughts, but now I want to hear yours. What do you guys think? Do you still play Battlefield 1? Why or why not? If not, what do you think is the main reason that made you leave? Do you even think that this should be a topic for discussion? Leave your answers, thoughts, and video suggestions down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like would be super appreciated. If you're new to the channel, you can click on your screen to subscribe. And if you'd like to see more from me, I've left some other videos that you can click on as well. That's all I got. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one.